looks like Frankenstein.
Hey, what's the matter? Haven't you guys ever seen anybody from the planet?
Guys are weird, man.
Cut it out, guys.
The mother who's a flamboyant California biker with an affinity for who bravely raises her little son Rocky, a little boy with a rare disease that eventually distorts his face into a...
He started getting a lot of ear infections and sinus infections and sore throats. So when he was 2.5, we had his tonsils out.
You think you already know this story. A boy with a rare facial condition, a fearless biker mom, a heartbreaking Hollywood film, Cher in black leather. Roll credits, pass the tissues, end of story, right? Not quite. Because what if that inspirational classic from the 80s only showed you the version that was easy to watch? What if the real story, the one that didn't fit neatly into a movie script, was far more complicated, far more human, and far more uncomfortable? Before she passed away, the real Rusty Dennis, the woman the world thought it understood, sat down and spoke openly about her son, her choices, and the film that turned their lives into legend. And what she shared wasn't polished for Hollywood. It wasn't softened for audiences. It was raw, honest, and for many people, shocking. This isn't just another retelling of a tragic story. This is about Roy Lee Dennis, known to most as Rocky, and his mother, Florence "Rusty" Tullis. It's about the truth behind the movie that moved millions, including Mask, and it's about the parts of their lives that never made it to the screen. Today, we're peeling back the layers of the legend and looking at the story the world thought it knew, but never fully understood. Who was Rocky Dennis, the real story? Before the spotlight, before the cameras, and long before Cher stepped into the role that would move millions, there was a real family living a very real life. To understand what Rusty later said, you have to go back to where it all began, not in Hollywood, but in a quiet California town. Roy Lee Dennis, known as Rocky, came into the world on December 4th, 1961 in Glendora. His mother, Florence Tullis, and her second husband, Roy Dennis, had no idea how different their son's life would be. The nickname Rocky stuck because as a baby he refused to sleep unless someone gently rocked him. It sounded sweet at the time, just a small family detail. No one knew how meaningful that name would later feel. As a toddler, Rocky was often sick. Ear infections, sinus problems, nothing that screamed danger, just a fragile child who seemed to catch everything. But at around 2 years old, he went in for what should have been a routine tonsil surgery. That's when everything shifted. During a simple X-ray, a technician noticed something unusual about his skull. What followed was a year filled with hospital visits to UCLA Medical Center, multiple appointments every single week, test after test, waiting room after waiting room, and then finally a diagnosis: craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. 2 clinical words, a lifetime of consequences. Even in 1965, doctors barely understood it. They told Rusty that only 6 cases had ever been recorded in medical history. 6. On the entire planet. The disease caused calcium to build up in the skull. The bones would thicken and expand, pushing outward. His face would change. His brain would be compressed. His vision and hearing would slowly disappear. Neurological damage would follow. Then came the sentence no parent is ever prepared for. Your son will likely be blind, possibly intellectually disabled, and he will not live past 7 years old. 7. That should have crushed her. It would have crushed most people. But Rusty Dennis was not most people. She didn't collapse under the prediction. She didn't quietly accept it. Instead, she looked at the doctors with a kind of stubborn fire and silently decided they were not going to write his son's ending. And that decision shaped everything that came after. While living in Covina and later returning to Glendora, Rusty refused to let schools or institutions treat Rocky like a lost cause. Doctors insisted his eyesight was too weak for reading. She ignored that. Schools tried to move him out of regular classrooms. She pushed back harder. When she later spoke to People magazine, she made it clear the problem wasn't her son's intelligence, it was other people's discomfort. And Rocky proved her right. He had a sense of humor that drew people in. He had warmth. He had charm. When screenwriter Anna Hamilton Phelan met him during a visit to UCLA's Center for Genetic Research, she was deeply moved. She would later say Rusty wasn't traditional, but she was exactly the kind of mother Rocky needed. Now here's the part many people miss. The woman portrayed on screen was softened, polished, made more digestible. But the real Rusty Dennis? She was raw, complicated, fierce, and impossible to ignore. The woman behind the leather jacket. Florence Rusty Tullis, born Florence Steinberg, entered the world on May 29, 1936 in Brooklyn. She grew up Jewish in a working-class household. Her father drove trucks. She learned early how to speak her mind, and she rarely filtered it. By 13, she had already been expelled from junior high for skipping school. At 14, she was smoking marijuana and riding with motorcycle crowds. At 15, she left school completely and worked as a hoochie-coochie dancer at Coney Island, still too young to even legally drive a car. Her life moved fast. At 17, she married a truck driver named Tommy Mason. Soon after, her first son, Joshua, was born. That marriage ended, and she returned to her parents' home. Later, she married Roy Dennis and moved west to California. In 1961, Rocky was born. By the time doctors gave her that devastating diagnosis, Rusty had already built her life around one core belief: the mind is powerful. She truly believed that if a person could make themselves sick through stress or fear, then maybe, just maybe, they could push themselves toward healing through belief and strength. That belief became the foundation of how she raised Rocky. Whenever he complained of pain, whenever headaches pounded from the pressure in his skull, she didn't smother him with pity. She would send him to his room and tell him to focus, to make himself well. It wasn't denial. It was her way of giving him power in a situation designed to make him powerless. She refused to let his identity shrink down to a diagnosis. Doctors predicted 7 years. Rocky lived far beyond that. And the most powerful part of this story isn't just about a rare disease or a movie adaptation. It's about a mother who refused to let statistics define her child. It's about a boy who grew up knowing he was more than the way he looked. And it's about the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the strongest people don't look polished or perfect. They look like Rusty Dennis, flawed, stubborn, unconventional, and unstoppable. Did Rocky's life feel empowering? His energy and fearless attitude make it seem that way, but there was another side to that story, one the movie only partly showed. The film hints at it, but it softens the truth. Rusty wasn't just a colorful background character. She was a real member of the Turks, a motorcycle gang made up of tough, loyal, rough-edged people. These weren't weekend bikers playing dress-up. They lived hard, loved hard, and built their own version of family, and Rocky was right at the center of that family. In the movie, the character Gar, played by Sam Elliott, was inspired by a real man named Bernie Tullis, Rusty's partner. The bikers around Rocky weren't props for drama, they were his people. Then there's the issue of drugs. The film suggested Rusty turned to drugs because she was overwhelmed and barely holding it together. Rusty strongly disagreed with that. In interviews, she made it clear she partied because she wanted to. Drugs were part of that lifestyle. She wasn't describing herself as broken or desperate. She was describing herself as someone who lived fast and owned it. That difference mattered deeply to her. So when the cameras showed up after Rocky died, what did this fiercely independent woman, biker, dropout, unconventional mother, actually say? because her words about the film, about her son, and about the night he died, that's where the story becomes uncomfortable. The movie, the money, and Rusty's real reaction. By 1985, Mask was playing in theaters across America. It was directed by Peter Bogdanovich and starred Cher as Rusty and Eric Stoltz as Rocky. The film earned over $48 million in ticket sales. $15,000 for the woman whose life and whose son's life made the story possible. Pause on that for a second. $48 million in ticket sales, $15,000 for the woman whose life and whose son's life made the story possible. But the number gets more complicated. According to multiple reports, most of that money went straight to medical bills for Rusty's older son, Joshua, who was being treated for AIDS at the time. She didn't sell Rocky's story to get rich. She sold it to try to keep another son alive. When the movie was released, reporters expected tears, gratitude, maybe glowing praise for Hollywood. Instead, Rusty called the film a fairy tale. Not a tribute, not a masterpiece, a fairy tale. And here's the interesting part. She didn't criticize Cher, she actually praised her. Rusty said Cher portrayed her accurately. She even joked, "I always thought I was perfectly normal, that the rest of the world is nuts." That line captures her perfectly. She didn't see herself as wild or reckless. She saw herself as real in a world that judged too quickly. Still, there were changes that bothered her. The film squeezed more than a decade of real life into what looked like about a year. And more painfully, Joshua, her older son, was erased from the story entirely. He simply didn't exist in the movie version of Rocky's life. Then there was the music. Rocky loved Bruce Springsteen. He was a devoted fan. Director Peter Bogdanovich originally built the soundtrack around Springsteen's songs, but the studio, Universal Pictures, couldn't secure the rights. Without telling Bogdanovich, they replaced the music with songs by Bob Seger. Rusty didn't hide her feelings about that. On a 1985 talk show appearance, she said plainly, "I don't think Rocky even knew who Bob Seger was." That one sentence said everything. Bogdanovich was furious and sued Universal for $19 million, arguing the swap violated his final cut rights. Years later, in 2004, the director's cut restored the Springsteen soundtrack, 2 decades after audiences first saw the film. But even all of that, the money, the missing son, the changed music, isn't the hardest part of this story. The hardest part is the night Rocky died. The night Rocky died, and the truth behind it. By September 1978, Rocky's health was fading fast. He was 16. The rare disease that doctors once believed would take his life before age 7 had finally begun to overpower him. In his final weeks, he used a wheelchair. The headaches he had battled his entire life became unbearable. One evening in late September, Rusty, Rocky, and their biker family went out to dinner. Everyone could see how fragile he had become. Later that night, he came home with another severe headache. Rusty did what she had always done. Since he was a child, she had told him to make yourself well. It was her philosophy, a refusal to let him see himself as dying. So, that night, she sent him to his room with those same words. He never woke up. Rocky Dennis died in his sleep on October 3, 1978. He was 16, just weeks shy of 17. He had already outlived his original prognosis by nearly 10 years. The movie shows Rusty discovering his body herself in a heartbreaking scene. But in real life, she wasn't home when he died. She was at her lawyer's office dealing with a drug possession charge. Bernie Tullis called her with the news. That difference matters, not because it makes her a villain, but because it shows how Hollywood reshaped reality. The film smoothed over the roughest edges of a life that was already complicated. Rusty never publicly said her "make yourself well" philosophy was a mistake. She never framed it as guilt or regret. She stood by it completely. She believed it gave Rocky something powerful, the ability to see himself as living, not dying. Did that belief sometimes minimize his pain? That's something only the two of them truly knew. What we do know is this: she never apologized for how she raised him. She believed, until the end, her approach gave him strength. But to really understand Rusty, her choices, her contradictions, her toughness, you have to understand Joshua. Because the son the movie erased may be the key to understanding why she sold Rocky's story at all, and why the truth behind Mask is far more layered than the fairy tale people saw on screen. Joshua, the son Hollywood never mentioned. Before the world cried over Rocky, there was another son. Joshua Mason was Rusty Dennis's first child, and when Mask reached the big screen, he was nowhere in sight. Mask left him out completely. For Rusty, that silence reportedly hurt. In 1985, Joshua was living in San Francisco, building a life as a writer. He was thoughtful, creative, and openly gay at a time when that still required courage. Then, in 1986, everything changed. He was diagnosed with Kaposi's sarcoma, the cancer that became tragically common during the height of the AIDS crisis. Joshua faced it head-on. So did his mother. He described Rusty as supportive and loving. She hoped for grandchildren one day and even suggested a sperm bank, not out of rejection, but out of longing for his future. That was Rusty. Complicated, emotional, human. Joshua died in 1987. He was just 32 years old. By then, Rusty had buried both of her sons. According to records connected to Mask, much of the money Rusty received from selling Rocky's story went toward Joshua's medical bills. Think about that for a moment. She sold one son's story in an attempt to save the other. In an interview with the Chicago Tribune, she once said, "Joshua doesn't believe in dying, and neither do I." That wasn't denial, it was defiance. Rusty's final chapter. After Rocky's death, Rusty moved north to San Francisco. The woman once known for chaos began searching for something quieter. She embraced Buddhism. She worked as a counselor, helping people fight drug addiction. At the time Mask was released, she had plans to work with the Shanti Project, supporting the terminally ill, including AIDS patients. The biker mother who once lived fast and loud was slowly building a life of service. She still rode motorcycles, though. That part never changed. On October 14, 2006, Rusty, then going by Florence Tullis, was riding her three-wheel motorcycle when the right tire suddenly came off. She lost control. The bike hit a curb. Her body struck a telephone pole. What makes it even more haunting is this: no one immediately knew it was her. A short notice in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune mentioned an unidentified 70-year-old woman injured in a motorcycle crash. Friends and family connected the dots. When they found her, she had 2 broken legs and a punctured lung. She survived the impact. Of course she did. She was Rusty Dennis. But the infection that followed was something even she couldn't outrun. Florence Rusty Tullis died on November 11, 2006, at Beverly Hospital in Montebello, California. She was 70 years old. Until the very end, she remained herself. She once said Rocky's death was just another place to go, and he loved going places. And she repeated that she and Joshua simply did not believe in dying. She never asked, why me? Not for Rocky, not for Joshua, not for herself. A 1986 Chicago Tribune profile described her as a 49-year-old Jewish mother, former drug addict, ex-go-go dancer, and Shackley distributor, living in a surprisingly neat biker apartment in San Francisco's Mission District, alongside a nephew and 3 bikers named Pelican, Lenny, and Steve. It sounds unbelievable. And yet, it explains everything. The legacy, stripped from Hollywood. Now remove the movie lighting, take away the dramatic soundtrack. What remains? Rocky Dennis lived almost 17 years with a rare bone disorder that doctors believed would end his life before he learned to read. Instead, he lived fully. He graduated from Sandburg Junior High as an honor student after starting behind academically. He was voted best buddy, most good-natured, and friendliest camper. He tutored classmates for $3 an hour and negotiated the price himself. He memorized constellations. He fell in love at summer camp with a blind girl who couldn't see his face but saw who he truly was. When doctors offered surgery to change his appearance, he asked one simple question: "If I change my face, who will I see in the mirror?" He chose himself. Rusty, meanwhile, was a Brooklyn-born biker with a messy past and an unshakable belief that her son was stronger than the world's judgment. She challenged principals who tried to push him into special education. She pushed back against doctors who reduced him to statistics. She surrounded him with fierce, loyal people who loved him without conditions. She told him every day he was not a victim. On the last night of his life, she sent him to his room and told him to make himself well, the same thing she had told him his whole life. And his whole life he tried. Screenwriter Anna Hamilton Phelan, who wrote Mask, once said, "This was not the PTA Mother of the Year, but she was the perfect mother for Rocky." Take that however you want. Rocky died at home, peacefully, without machines, without a hospital room, without indignity. Rusty had promised him that, and she kept her promise. Rusty died the way she lived, moving, untamed, and on her own terms. If you were hoping for a neat ending, you won't find it here. Rusty Dennis was never polished enough for that. What she left behind wasn't perfection, it was something rarer. She left truth, raw, flawed, defiant truth. And maybe that's the real story Hollywood could never fully capture. Because sometimes the legacy isn't in the movie. It's in the parts they left out.